Yeah, 9. Dave Allenson. Yeah. Yeah. It's even got a thing so I don't spit on it.
And my co-host. Good, that's the formal shit out of the way.
Yeah.
Dave's got a new mic.
That I'm gonna do.
So
So
hopefully we're proper podcast wankers now. We're moving up in the world. We've got 2 functioning mics.
So my client
Yeah,
Steve.
you can make them like fake videos now on Instagram. So like like when people post that they pretend they're talking to somebody, they're actually just talking to themselves.
He was like, you need to do as many of them as humanly possible.
Yeah, you should just like you're on like you're being interviewed, but you're really just fucking talking to yourself in your
all of them
guest
and just
bedroom.
tag you in it. Just like he was like, if you can get 90 seconds of you going, oh hi, didn't see you there, we just tip you over the edge. Like a Tory politician had come to canvass your doorstep.
Yeah, it made me feel a little.
That's what
It
I
made
was
me feel a
hoping
little
for.
bit
Is that
unwell.
people would open their phones and be like, "Oh, fuck off."
Yeah. Obviously, it was all satire, but yeah, it was just like I just opened my Instagram and you were just going, "Oh, hi there." I was like, "Fuck's sake, what is this?" Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. Anyway, so today on this episode, whilst we're rambling, we're going to talk about instructionals and specifically the value of instructionals. Are they valuable? How can we get the value from them? How can they help you potentially improve your skill set on the mats? And because obviously they're a very prevalent thing in jiu-jitsu. They are fucking everywhere at this point. Every man and his dog has got an instructional. And it can be quite often the case of like sifting through the shit. There are obviously going to be some that are extremely valuable in many regards, and then there is others going to be less valuable. Obviously, there's going to be loads of determinant factors on whether that is valuable to you, and obviously we want to talk about the positives and the negatives of them, and how that is potentially going to impact your jiu-jitsu or grappling journey, if we want to use a cliche fucking quotation. We're on X Factor, but instructional. So obviously they are everywhere. Like I said, every man and his dog's got one. Every athlete. I think one of the big problems with instructionals in the modern day grappling is that they are typically where a lot of athletes are earning income from. So the need to record and release instructionals isn't necessarily correlated with quality. Which is a big factor that we have to negate. But I think an important thing to make first and foremost is a bit of a definition of what where instructionals can have value. So what would you say, Dave, is where do you think instructionals fit into the training paradigm? Where do you think they produce value? Where do they have value? What can they be useful for an individual when it comes to their own training?
Yes, if you've got a very, very specific problem, if you repeatedly end up in a position and it keeps going wrong and you know that there's something there that you can't get quite right, then that can be very helpful to look at the specific technique. But you'll also notice that within about a minute and a half, they'll have shown you several different variations or several different positional variations or whatever, because actually the thing that matters is what sits behind the ability to do that. So loads of people complain about, for example, Dana has DVDs where they're like, "Oh, I've been watching for 40 minutes and I haven't got to any instructions." Like, well, yeah, because the first listen to it on 2 times speed, because otherwise I don't know what's wrong with you. And second, like a lot of that early preamble where he talks you through the background of jiu-jitsu and the principles of how the actual sport works really fucking matter, because in every other sport that's prevalent. Like people know what Andrew's disappeared. Hopefully he will return. There he is. Yeah, so in every other sport, people are aware of kind of the technical, tactical considerations because there is a standard for coaching that has to be met that's at a minimum. Like if you want to coach rugby, you have to have a qualification. You want to coach football, you have
It's
to have
all
a
right.
certain
Just
level of
adjusting something on my phone.
qualification. And within that, you will get taught on how to coach. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll use all of that, but it does mean that you have a certain level of understanding of how the game actually works. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, you might not have any of that. And that's quite a scary eye-opener for a lot of people. I think, like Andrew and I started, just to fucking ramble again, but we started at the right point where all of this was just starting to appear. And I can still remember people's minds, including black belts who ran gyms and had for years, and people who'd been successful and people who'd had success with their students at Europeans and events like that, being like, fuck me, this is a completely different way of thinking about all of this. It's almost like he's showing you what sits behind all the stuff that you've learned. And so one of the ways in which instructionals are very useful, and I'm not just saying Danaher's here, there's plenty, like you and I talked about, I think it's Craig Jones's pinning one is meant to be very, very good, and his power bottom is also meant to be, or is it just stand up, is meant to be very good for MMA fighters because it just happens to sort of suit the way in which they do things, because it's more, and this is probably going to link into what you're going to say, but it's more heuristic based rather than here is the technique for this specific situation, or rather than that just being what they do. So I think they can be very helpful for giving you heuristics and systems to try and here we go. I'll let you define what we don't mean by a system before we get too far into that.
So I think there's a really difficult thing, and one of the things I wanted to talk about is like when we're looking at like, and I think this is something that we can all sort of, we've all experienced, we've all felt something. There's this idea behind like knowledge is key, okay, and something that I often ask guys to think about is if knowledge was the key determinant of success, then surely acquiring more would make us better. And it's not always that case. Like if you can be, and in a way I want you to think about this is like, if you watched every instructional available, you're still going to have moments where if we use a very general term, can't think of the answer to a problem. So you're on the mats, someone's presented you with an issue, like, and you can't figure out a solution for it. So it becomes quite evident that just acquiring more knowledge is not the key determinant of being successful at something. It doesn't, having more information of a technical framework doesn't make you a better grappler. It doesn't increase your skill. So even from a traditional sort of like cognitive approach to skill development, it's very clear that information we gather from an environment, i.e. an opponent, a round, or whatever it is going to be highly deterministic of our approach to solving problems. So what we want to almost do when we're looking at like instructionals, I think, is like, first and foremost, we want to have a decent understanding of like, well, what is skill acquisition? Well, what are we trying to do? What is it that is going to help us get better? So there's various different ways that you could look at this, but like a really simple way of viewing it is what we're trying to do as individuals is create a greater or stronger connection to our environment. So we're getting better at picking up information that is provided to us by an opponent, or again the environment. We'll use the word opponent. So for me, again, depending on which lens that you look at it through, and I think this is where the ecological approach within grappling is having its real success, is because it is grounded in building an individual's connection to an environment. It's all about how an individual is picking up on this information. So, for those who haven't heard of Rob Gray is sort of like the goat of ecological frameworks of skill acquisition. He's written 2 books. If you haven't read them, I highly recommend you read them. Because they are really, really, really beneficial and broken down in a really impactful way. And in one of his there's a chapter on one of his book, and it's about this idea of like skill acquisition. What does it mean that we are developing more skill? And there was a really good study that's quoted, and they within the study break down skill acquisition into 3 key points. Now, obviously, this is an ecological framework, but I think it fits this really well because it allows us to draw a correlation between a instructional model and a representative task completion. So the 3 categories are education of attention, education of intention, and then recalibration of movement. So 3 really simple categorizations that we can look at, and we can sort of look at and go, all right, I see how these individual factors of training fit into this model. So when we look at like an instructional framework, we've obviously got education of attention. So what is being highlighted in terms of things that we want to draw our attention to? So can we control our movements based on better sources of information? So obviously when you're watching an instructional, chances are the individual is going to be an exceptional grappler, whether it is Gordon, whether it's Craig Jones, whether it's Danaher, whatever it is. They're going to be they're the best of the best. So their affordance of information is much better than ours is as just muggle fucking brown belts or purple belts or blue belts or whatever it is. So you've got that aspect. So you've got an individual who's able to go, this is a big wide open world that you probably weren't aware of. So it draws our attention to certain things. Now, obviously, we've also got education of intention. So we've got this is the thing that we want to be focusing on. This is how we go about doing it. Now, this might be really simple. So like you mentioned the Craig Jones pinning DVD. Obviously not DVD. DVDs don't exist anymore. Craig Jones instructional. But so within, obviously I've not watched it, but I've heard really good things about it. But that'll be a case of like, okay, the attention is, in order to control somebody, we want to focus on pinning them to the floor. So that's our attention. That's what we're sorry, that's our intention. Sorry, that's our intention. That's what we want to do. We want to pin somebody to the ground. How we go about this is we focus on keeping their shoulders flat to the ground, whatever it is, an arbitrary quote. So within that, we've got 2 really, really impactful pieces of information that we can then go into a mat, and we get this element of recalibration of movement because we're now having to apply ourselves with timing, decision making, speed, all this various different stuff that we need to be successful within a movement based execution, to then go and be like, right, I'm going to do this, and this is how I'm going to practice it. I'm going to do it in a representative environment, which I think we can all agree is the most important thing. We want to make it as close to the real world event as possible, and we can apply it. So I think for me, that's where the value of an instructional can be. I think we lose value, like you said, in the over systematization of something, as in do this, then do this, then do this, then when the person does this, then we do this, because it never works like that. None of us are as good as those other individuals. We're not, I mean, I can speak for myself. I don't know about you, Dave. I'm not Gordon Ryan. I'm never going to be as good as Gordon Ryan. I don't have the neurodiversity as Gordon Ryan to think about things in a specific way. So what we want to try and do as individuals is take relevant information,
I think,
get context of a relevant position, and then take that into a representative environment. And I've rambled a bit there, but that's how I viewed it. I thought that chapter was a really good way of summarizing it.
Dana has entered the system with the leg lock stuff to begin with. And that's because previously you naturally have not necessarily systems, but you naturally have like a hierarchy of positions, or you have a hierarchy of, what if they give you from this position, if they put their arm in this way, it opens up this part of the game to you in a way that it doesn't if they don't. Whereas with
Yeah.
legs, no one had really. The average person had no fucking clue what any of it meant. Like, they wouldn't know that they needed to control the inside position. They would, let alone knowing what all the different leg positions are called and what their fucking Japanese names are. Most people just didn't even realize that the basic heuristics of like control the inside space. If you get caught in something, one way out is to like put pressure on the hamstring and free the knee line, like that sort of stuff. Like, exactly, like there was nothing. So Danaher was actually sharing a system because he had spent time putting one together based on lots of people fucking each other's knees up for an extended period of time. And that then led to the back control
Double
system,
trouble.
which, again, I think back control is an interesting one because it's relatively limited. You can systematize a little bit more. Whereas open guard, yeah, yeah,
So again, if we use a bit more theoretical approach,
yeah,
a way to view this is levels of variability. So obviously, jiu-jitsu is based on I always think about it. I think Dana has talked about it on Rogan, but like
yeah,
the way I think about it is like it's almost like a funnel. So the more at the top is very open, it's big, wide, and there's
yeah,
shitloads of variability. Hierarchies of grappling are based around isolating variability. So I think, again, like you from either sides of whether you're looking at it from like a Danaher very prescriptive side of things, or you're looking at it from like a very ecological side of things, from like a Greg Saunders point of view, it's always about creating degrees of isolation. So we're always limiting the amount of availability that our opponent, the amount of option that our opponent has. Now, you could, like you said, argue that in positions of less variability, we can create more quote unquote systematized viewpoints because there is only so many actions an individual can take, as compared to like an open
yeah,
guard
yeah.
where
Because the open game,
the
yeah,
amount
yeah.
of actions
I
an individual can take can
was
be
going to say that does
almost,
depend,
well,
doesn't
I
it?
mean
Because there's
in
only so
almost
many
infinite
options.
really. It's
Yeah,
this is where I think, interestingly, completely off topic, this is where jiu-jitsu gets its comparison to chess. Now, I should preface this. I should preface this. I know absolutely. Well, this
yeah,
is the thing. So I actually know very little about chess, but I was having a
yeah, yeah,
conversation with a lad at the gym who does know a little bit
yeah,
about chess. I haven't got a fucking clue about it, but he was actually referring to the point that like opens and closes tend to be very structured. There's very key names for openers and closes, apparently. Whereas the middle part is where all that variability is. Like it's almost indefinite the amount of options an individual can take. And I think that's where jiu-jitsu gets a comparison,
yeah.
because there are parts of jiu-jitsu where the amount of actions that can be
Yeah, so
taken
well, just to give
are
like a
so
practical
broad. The
example,
variability is
if you're at the
massive.
bottom of a very high
Whereas
mountain
there are
and the
also
person's
parts
got
of the game where
double
the
arm control,
variability,
you have
again,
very few
still
options
contextual. There's
available
still a
to you,
lot of things
if
that
any,
somebody can do, but it's
compared
slightly
to
more
like
narrow.
you
They're a
both
bit
stand,
more
bump
strict
fists,
in terms of
and off you
the
go.
ways that you go about
There's
it.
an awful lot of variability from that opening sequence by comparison, because there's like I think Danaher talks about layers of control, because you both of you have got zero control over each other, and from that point
Yeah.
on, that's where the actual thing starts. That's all right.
Fucking dog's
But
got his leg
I think that's
leg
something
wrapped
that
around the
some
laptop
instructionals do
charger.
well.
Just
Is,
worried about him toppling
again,
everything.
that's a
Sorry.
discussion that
But
isn't
yeah, no,
always
no, no.
had
So
about
you're
jujitsu
right.
being
Like,
very open
and
and
again, that
people
doesn't
are
really
slowly
help us fit
closing
into the
things down.
narrative of
And that's one of the
instructionals,
things that the
because
first
that's just sort of
instructionals
like
did, was
the
go,
game as it
hey,
is.
here's what we're trying to
But
do and why.
it,
And I think something that good instructionals do very well is they will tell you why. And I'm not saying you need, so like, to go back to the point that you were making earlier about people think that it's all about knowledge. Well, people think that all learning is about knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge is the fucking ground floor. It needs to be there in terms of you need to know
Yeah.
things. Now, whether that for jiu-jitsu, that's you need to have experienced lots of positions and lots of you need to know what they feel like rather than you need to necessarily know what they're called or whatever, which is a bit different to classroom learning where you will have to
Yeah.
know the names of things and all that kind of stuff to be able to do stuff with the information. But it's the ground floor. Like if you keep widening that base and widening that base and widening that base, you're still never going to build something as tall as someone who's widened it enough. And then on top of that, they've layered some understanding, and then they've layered application, and then and that's the bit that I think gets missed, is that people see it as I need to collect as much information as possible, when really what they need to do is develop their understanding so that then they can apply that in the actual environments and representative environments on the mats. So like we've talked about before, that sometimes the best feedback that you can give someone, because you do this as part of your service, I'm trying to slowly learn the ropes, but giving people feedback about their roles, like one of the most useful things is not actually to look at where they lost. It's to go further back and find that initial point where things started going wrong for them. Because from a technical tactical, the technical tactical element is very underdeveloped, and that's what all those years ago Kit Dale talked about, where it's you need that understanding of the technical tactical game to help you to actually start thinking about why you're doing the actions that you're doing. So it's almost like, maybe I'm using all the words wrong, but that technical tactical understanding or system understanding or whatever we want to call it allows you affordance for action. So if you understand that the opening sequence of jiu-jitsu is very open and you're both simultaneously very far away and very close to potentially getting submitted, that's where fucking flying arm bars and all that sort of shit comes in. You can realize that, especially for white belts, the first thing is just fucking grip up, because people will lose because they don't get a hold of their opponent, or they'll waste 4 minutes out of the match because the pair of them just hug each other around the back of the head and ballroom dance. So it's essentially, I think sometimes that can create, that understanding can create affordance for action. It doesn't mean that you need to know all of the names of the things, and it doesn't mean that you need to know all of the steps. But if you know like a simple heuristic like fucking hip height matters, for example, you can get away with all of the octopus guard shit and stuff like that Craig Jones does. That's really just a more complex way of thinking about the fact that
Well,
if your hips are higher than the other person's, you can win. Hmm.
yeah. So interestingly, again, to go back to the chapter in Rob Gray's book, one of the quotes that I've written down is affordance perception typically requires experience. So it what that means is, obviously, again, like we use more sort of ecological terminology, is we it's very difficult because you're trying to merge that line, like you said, between knowledge and experience, and obviously what those terms mean depending on different which lens you look at it is going to have slightly different meaning. But it's going to be much easier to apply something within something else that you've already got contextual understanding of what that might feel like. So I think this is where where people we start to see, again, trying not to be too general, but so like this is why different games emerge. And again, we're going back into the whole fucking individual constraints and stuff like this. But it's why some people get very good at leg locks, because there's definitely an element of intention in terms of like, I want to be good at that thing, but they're going to have generally going to have an element of like, oh, I sort of have a grasp of what this feels like. I've got a grasp of what that position might be like. And it's easy for you then to go, all right, well, this is just this, but in a slightly different context. again, like this is like the premise of what like a constraint led approach is built on, is that you're not teaching someone to do one thing. You're teaching them to do one thing in very general, lots of different varying degrees of execution. An armbar from closed guard is the same as an armbar from mount. It's just inverted. It's just slightly different, but it's the same principles that overlap it. And I think that's the now instructionals as a whole can be very good at that, because then they can allow an individual to take something that they can't conceptually understand, and go, oh, hang on, that's just that in a slightly different format, and or vice versa. Like, and I think that's where they can be. I think for me personally, like, I think this is where descriptive information can be really beneficial in certain instances. Like, yes, it's probably not going to be too impactful in overall skill acquisition, because fundamentally we have to go away and go, I need to practice this a lot. But it can also be like, oh, so that's how I go about achieving this. I sent you a voice note about this at the weekend, but like when we sort of agreed about this topic for this episode, I was thinking about like other areas or other sports where you might watch like instructional information. So like one of the ones that came to me was like skateboarding. So obviously there's a large amount of tricks that an individual has to learn with their skateboarding, whether it's like a kickflip. Now, somebody in theory could spend a large amount of time trying to work out how to do a kickflip through an emergent format, as in like no prescriptive information. But you could go on YouTube and go, how do I learn to kickflip, and watch a video on like the nuances of kickflip. Where do I need to foot positioning? What am I thinking about? Where am I angling my foot off from lift off, etc., etc. Now, that'll give a little bit of like perceptive affordance, again, to use the technical term. So you have an idea of what it looks like, what you need to do. But then obviously you need to then go away and apply it within a representative environment. You need to go and practice it. You need to learn what it feels like. You need to learn like I said, the timing, the execution, all those underpinnings of movement that have to occur for you to be successful. And I think that's something where we go wrong within jiu-jitsu, is we go, right, we have these like layers, and this is again my thing, is why I think drilling's shit, because it just doesn't match. We obviously have descriptive information, which can be really, really impactful. And we've got the rolling element where it's also really impactful, where we have to like really, really practice and try really hard to do it. But in the middle, we have this like shit little bit where everyone goes, well, we have to do this in order to get better at it. It's like, well, you fucking don't, because that's not teaching you anything about this. All it's teaching you is a slight step up from the start bit. You might as well have just gone from, here's a bit of information, go and fucking try it. And I think that's where the value is for instructionals. I don't think it is in that like middle ground of like over prescription of like, do this, then do this, then do this, then we're going to do it really slowly. I think information's fantastic. But
I think
we also just then need to go, right, go away and practice a lot.
I think
And again, that's where this like idea of like
what I'm
recalibration of
describing as
movement is,
understanding fits
because we
better
have
in
to
that,
learn to
because there's
apply
such
it under a
practical elements to
large degree and
understanding.
variation of
But
context.
let's put it this way: if instructionals were the be all and end all, and it was all about just acquiring knowledge,
if that makes
and
sense,
people could just pour it into your heads, like we could get onto seminars, but that's a different matter. And I think it also depends on who's doing the seminars and how they run them, because I think some people do them very well. But it's about finding fuck, I've just lost my train of thought. It's just completely gone out of my head. So there's the practical element of it. If it were all about just finding that information, then we wouldn't be making fun of, if you remember this, Gracie Bullyproof. Yeah. So there's a thing years ago online where one of the Gracies, I can't think which one it is, the one who was involved in that court case where the guy hurt his spine. Henna, yeah. He was also invented a
fuck
hoodie
me, I
that
don't
turns into a
remember
bag.
that. There's been that much shit come out of there. I
He
don't.
took on Shark Tank. They had this like online portal that you could go and learn, and you could get a Gracie bully-proof blue belt by taking an online course and then videoing yourself doing the moves, and they'd send you this Gracie bully-proof blue belt in the post. after you'd sent some money. And that got roundly mocked because it's a fucking get rich quick scheme, but allegedly. But I'm sure it provides loads of value before we get sued. But if it was just about acquiring knowledge, then we wouldn't have roundly abused that for what it was. Because the problem there is there's zero application, because you've got no one to practice it against. You've got no, it's like all these like self-defense classes that people do, where it's against an unresisting, polite coach. That means nothing, because it's not representative of the actual environment that you're going to be doing it in.
Yeah.
So you can't just watch the instructional. Unsurprisingly, you also can't just go and drill the instructional with a training partner. You have to fucking resist each other, and you have to actually try and apply it to each other when the other person doesn't want you to. But they can be very helpful in giving both of you enough contextual knowledge and understanding to know what the other's trying to do. So even if all it does is give you a small game, like, oh, I'm trying to put my leg there and you're trying to stop me putting my leg there, then immediately the two of you can go and gain hours of experience by playing that game in a way that you would never have worked out that that's a thing that you should go and do to help you develop a specific thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, this is where I think obviously there's a lot of, I think, again, when you look at it, like if you look online, obviously again with the emergence of like an ecological framework, is like these sort of things get a little bit of hate because obviously they are descriptive, and it's the sort of very strict ecological viewpoint is like, oh, there's no room for sort of, oh sorry, I don't say no room, but like minimal room for minimal impact from descriptive information. But obviously, for the majority of people, that doesn't mean anything because they're not in gyms that apply that approach. They don't know that they're going to go in and work on games and all that sort of stuff. They have to go, right, I know I've got 10 5-minute rounds on a Thursday where I can go in and try something. That's the method. So it's like, and yeah, you could look at it from a global perspective, as in like, yeah, we've created this system for ourselves, and that's the problem with the game. Yeah, blah blah blah. But that doesn't help anyone in the short term, does it? So then, I think, like you said, it can create, instructions can be really useful because they can, like I said, provide people with information that they might not necessarily need. Now, again, something that's worthwhile pointing out is, and I think this is an important thing to distinguish, is, are you, like you said, are you using an instructional to actually help you get better, or are you using an instructional to just gain some degree of knowledge? And then that's when the debate comes of like, is it a waste of time? So like, if you're watching, I don't know, if you weigh 90 kilos, 100 kilos, and you're watching Mikey Mushimeki's Berimbolo DVD, is that going to be a good use of your time? Probably not. Now, obviously, if you're a 90-kilo bloke who can invert on a sixpence,
but
then
like,
that's a different story. But for the majority, I'm making
if you
broad
invert that, it
generalizations,
works really
it's probably
nicely.
not
So
going to
if
be the
you're
best use of your
65
time.
kilos and you're
You're
watching
probably going
Josh
to be better off
Barnett's
spent
How to
watching
Have
stuff
Heavy
that's
Top
like
Pressure DVD,
how to
you'll
pin
get
somebody
somewhere,
effectively,
but
how
probably
to,
not
I don't know,
the same as
wrestle up,
a big
whatever it is,
fucking
like
strong guy
something a bit
will
more
get from.
contextual. But I yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And again, like it can also, there's many contexts where they can be useful. I think problem solving is a really good one, because if you don't have, again, you don't have access to training partners that allow you to go and gamify a training session, you're going to need some information. You need it from somewhere. Like it's going to be very, because like again, you need, when one of the big issues that we have within, I was talking to, again, he's had quite a few shout outs on this podcast, Mike Plevin, the other day, and he was talking about top pressure, and he was saying that he'd had a bit of feedback about it. And I was like, he was like, are there any gains? I said, there's loads of gains, but the problem is if you don't change your approach, nothing's going to change. You need some information to go in and apply something different that's going to make it, that's going to force you to reorganize in a different way. So if you're somebody who's like, let's say, I don't know, you run into knee shield from half guard, you can't get past a knee shield. Right, well, I don't know. What does Gordon do? Again, we're using the term instructionals, but we can also just talk about like match footage as well. Like what is Gordon doing to beat a knee shield? Now, obviously, you've got no context of how that feels or what the other person's feeling, how he's moving, how he's applying his weight, all this different stuff. But it can give you a little bit of an insight into be like, right, I sort of know what I need to be aiming for, what I'm wanting to cover, what I'm trying to grip, whatever it is. Again, whether that's impactful or not, we can debate, but it's going to give you a little insight. It is going to give you something to go in and be like, right, I know what I'm going to try and work on today. And you apply it in a representative environment and learn to organize yourself. Interestingly enough, again, on topic, I've got a client and he's been using the same Craig Jones DVD that we've been talking about. I keep saying DVD, instructional. And one of the interesting things that he's found, which I thought was really interesting, so when he started watching it, his performance increased significantly. After about 2 weeks, it started to drop. And it was one of the things that, and then obviously then it plateaued. And one of the interesting things was like he went in with this obviously emergence of information, but he didn't actually have the tools to like consistently apply it. He hadn't learned the skill of what he was trying to do. He was just mirroring actions. So we had this initial like spike of like success because he was just. Oh, it's just paused. I don't know what happened then. But it wasn't really him like improving his skill. All he was doing was just getting that element of performance of like, oh, I can do this. But it wasn't really him actually getting better. It took weeks and weeks and weeks of him failing at shit and then actually learning to apply the information for himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think something where that sort of thing can be useful is it can make that long, slow slog of fucking around and finding out palatable. Because you've got an intention, you've got you know it works, so you know you're not wasting the next 6 months of your life. Because there is nothing, and we've talked about this before, but there is nothing worse than someone investing their time and effort into trying to master something that's fucking useless. Because no matter how well you apply something, if it's not very good, it's not very good. So like, just to give a proper example, one of my training partners, Josh, he years ago told me, like, why would you ever spend time on a technique that requires your opponent to do something fucking stupid? Because they're not in your control. If you can't force that reaction, then you're wasting your time, because all it takes is someone to figure out that they don't need to do that. So like, he used, what was the example he said about it was one of the collar chokes in the gi, and he was like, but you can just, it wasn't the cross collar choke, before anyone gets upset about that one, but it was just a simple, like, if you simply remove the hand, then that's gone. So if you grip fight, even if you didn't know what the person was doing, if you were just a successful grip fighter, then who cares? I think there was a video a little while of Dan Strauss talking about having like the best grip.
With Roland Rodolfo Rivera.
Yeah, and then he just got choked anyway, and it's like, that's kind of, it's not the same thing at all, but it's sometimes investing things in things that are impressive is cool, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. There's a sort of pragmatic razor that comes with jiu-jitsu that I think is really helpful, that some people are aware of and some people are not, in terms of deciding where to invest your time. And that's where instructionals can be very helpful, because if you get them from people who are elite, generally a lot of their stuff will have passed that test. Because if you can do it, let's say you're an outlier and you're fantastic at something, and then you go and compete against all the other outliers, unless it is something that actually works, it'll get thrown at the wayside straight away, because everyone will figure it out and then you'll be fucked within a few weeks.
Yeah, it's and again, this is it. Again, it's like it's very difficult because we're talking. We're not talking about it from like a coaching perspective in this, because it's we're simply talking about like individuals watching it. So it's like it's really hard to go, well, this is the best practice, because we don't know the best practice. It is
Yeah.
When you're talking about it from an individual perspective, like you're trying to get better as an individual, it is a case of like finding a pragmatic solution that works best for your development. It's not a case of like an ecological framework or a traditional framework. It's like, well, what's going to have the most impact on you as an individual? And you are completely right. There obviously is some really good resources and there are some really bad resources. And with the abundance of information that we have access to now, like you said, like when I started, it was like a couple of shit Budo videos.
Yeah.
And that was it. And it was now the possibilities are endless in terms of the stuff you can learn. And finding, again, this is a much broader topic of like finding the right people to invest your time. Like you said,
Yeah.
Gordon is by far the best athlete, but he also might not be the best athlete it's instructional to watch. This might sound ridiculous,
Yeah.
but because he's the best in the world, his perspective of what grappling is completely different to what you and I experience. It's like Lionel Messi trying to teach me how to take a free kick with his left foot or dribble a football. Like, it's our perception of that task
I just do
is
it.
completely different. Yeah, just do it. Just like you go left, then you go right, then you go left, then you go right, and then you move your head a little bit, and it's just like that's not how it works. So you can't. It's a very weird thing to explain when you're like talking about instructions, because it's like just the information is good, but just don't take it as gospel, because you need to figure out
And I think,
how that applies to you.
yeah, I think just to give more useful heuristics, but one that's potentially helpful is find someone who produces high level athletes, because there are a good few people who run very good gyms and don't necessarily compete themselves, but their guys compete at high levels. And I think there's more of that than there used to be. Now, sometimes there's both, like Craig Jones or Gordon to a certain extent if it suits your style. The other thing that you've got to select is, do you like the way they teach? Because if you can't fucking stand listening to them, you're not going to get anything out of it. And that sounds really silly, but like, when you're first starting with this, you probably need to pick someone whose teaching style that you enjoy. And the only way you're going to find that out is by listening to different people. But you're probably better off starting there. Later on, you can get to listening to the people that you know are really fucking good, but you can't stand. Like, I can't think of anything worse than trying to use this properly, and then the very first time you ever go and try and listen to an instructional, you pick up one of the old Danaher ones,
Yeah,
and you're 4 hours in and you don't know what the fuck half the words are, and why is this
yeah.
happening, and what's Danaher talking about, and is this
Another
philosophy? Why is my life this way?
another extension of that, and probably is grossly overlooked, is pick somebody who looks similar to you or moves in a certain way. Like again, me trying to focus on Craig Jones, for example, is obviously he's a good explainer of things, but his body type is completely different to me. Like, I'd be probably better suited watching like Nicky Ryan, for example. A little bit shorter, a little bit stockier. How does he move? How does he apply things relative to the likes of like a Craig Jones, who's obviously very tall, very sort of almost like not scrawny, because he's not skinny, but like he's a bit lanky, isn't he? He's got very
He's
long
got long
legs,
limbs. Yeah,
very long legs, very long arms,
he's
sort of
got
like short
long
torso,
dancer's
like
legs.
it's long dancer's legs. Like, he's obviously incredibly mobile at the hips. Like, he can do things with his hips that fucking there's not many people that can move in that way. So it's like, for me to watch him apply things is going to be completely different. But so like that's another thing to pick up on. It's like you said, like, are they actually any good? So it's like, have they actually produced things? Like, are they doing it successfully
Yeah,
at the high level? It's going to be really useful because they're going to have a good way of problem solving. I'd argue look for elements of like non-specific technique. So like not just like how to do an armbar, but is it like Craig Jones, how to pin somebody down?
Like that's probably like again, Danaher, how to control the back. Like really good, like general topics that you can go like, okay, I'll take this, I'll take this, I'll take this. Because otherwise you just end up with this like I had Lachlan Giles' 50-50 DVD. And no disrespect to Lachlan Giles, some of it was brilliant. But I was watching it, I was like, there was just like, this is what you do when this happens. This is what you do when this happens. This is what you do when this happens. And I was like, this is giving me a fucking headache. It all looks the same to me. And it sometimes with these instructionals, people are trying to provide value with something that's not needed. Like, I'll hold my hands up. I've sat through the 8 hours of John Danaher's Enter the Leg Lock system. And for 8 hours, there's probably about 20 minutes of gold. And so there was 7 hours.
That's also
and
the state of things.
Yeah, like there was 7 hours of 40 minutes is not needed.
Yeah, of course, because it's the whole like didn't quite finish becoming a philosopher nonsense where you just talk for fucking 9 hours. But that also shows the state of how things were back then that blew people away, because that 20 minutes of gold, you could spend 8 hours watching 4 different instructionals and find nothing.
Yeah. And do you know what those 20 minutes of gold were? As we've summarised. Inside position. Double trouble. Some degree of hip control. I can't remember it off the top of my head because that exposes the heel. And then something to do with the angle of your arm in comparison to the foot, which creates pressure on the ankle. And that was pretty much it off the top of my head. So 4 things. But like again, like those 4 things could significantly improve your leg lock game. You just have to take those 4 things and apply them within a setting. Now, again, if anyone listens to this and you're coming from the true sort of ecological podcasts, there's a lot wrong with this in terms of like, but what we're trying to do is create a good middle ground to what already exists. And how can we get a bit better at training from that? How can we help the everyday person who can't control what they do in the gym, who's just trying to find a way to get a little bit better? They know that they've got 10 5-minute open rounds. We have to have a little bit of weight to it. We can talk about what's optimal all day long. We can talk about what the science says, but what matters really is what's practical in the lens of the world that people are living in. And at the minute, the state of the world is most people don't have access to game or constraint-based training. They don't have access to some of the best coaches in the world. They literally have an instructional they can buy online and 10 5-minute rounds on a Thursday night that they can go in and apply it. So we have to create a little bit of there has to be a bit of leeway in terms of like what is technically quote unquote optimal. So it's like in summary, like no, go on, sorry.
So the other thing that I think is important is that often with this approach, one of the touch points for where this approach is successful is other sports, especially the ecological method around wrestling and sort of that's often like people's way into all of this. And I think sometimes it gets left at the wayside that those sports would not shy away from some description. Because if yes, it wouldn't be the basis of their approach, and they wouldn't spend fucking 4 days on it. But a few words in the right position or at the right moment for the right person can completely change their affordance for action.
Of course, yeah.
And then they will go and apply it and do the hard graft of actually figuring it out. And that's where you need to come up with games and all of the things to achieve that. But sometimes fucking lifting the curtain up and giving the person a little bit of like, I think sometimes people see this as cheating.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make people excellent at grappling. We're not. There is no cheating in how you have to teach. So I think it's worth having that taking the taboo, I think, away from doing stuff like that, because it is helpful. It's just that you don't spend the entire fucking session describing every single leg lock position, because that's not going to do anything useful.
That's the big issue. Is it's probably just oversaturated. That's the big thing. Is there's just so much information, and 90% of it is absolutely useless for the most part. And that's the issue I think people take with it, is that it's not that, like you said, information isn't good, or it's neither good nor bad. It's just information. It is what it is, isn't it? It's done how that information is contextualized and applies, which makes it good or bad. And I think there is, like you said, there's loads of examples of how information, and descriptive information in particular, can make us better at something. I think, and like I said, there's many examples of this, like in sport, or I don't know, art, painting. If you wanted to get better at painting, a bit of information of like how to use your colourings better can be a significant significant thing.
To give away how fucking nerd I am, I like painting Warhammer, and
I was going to say Dave is a massive nerd.
Laugh at you if you wanted to. Would laugh at you if you wanted to learn brush control, and you went, but I have to intuit all of it. I don't want anyone telling me. Give me a drill to go, and they just go, here it is, go and have a play. The information is there, and they're like, and the information is important because it means you don't have to spend 9 hours figuring out the right approach to then spend another 9 hours practicing it. It's, here it is, you go and play with it, and you can adapt and adjust and do whatever you want to make it fit for you and see whether you like it or not. But I think sometimes it's this, just sometimes it feels like there's an assumption that you have to intuit everything, or it has to all emerge out of nowhere. And that's just not necessarily the case. It just means don't lose the application, because that's the bit that fucking matters.
Yeah, that's the thing that's where the skill of something is going to come from. It's that practical representative. Excuse me, I fucking burped then. Practical representative, come from the depths. Practice. That's what. That is the meat and bones of it. But a little bit of information here and there can go a long way. And again, we could extend. We haven't got the time for it. We could extend a lot more on this in terms of like the use of language and how you go about directing that information. That can be really important. And unfortunately, that's where instructionals get a lot of bad reputation, because of the way that the information is portrayed. It's very internal and it's not external, and there's loads of research about that. But we'll not get into that because we won't have the time for it. But I think it's trying to not just demonize everything, or also say everything is the best thing, because there is many examples of why an instructional will not help you get better. It might be more confusing. It is probably a massive waste of your energy and your time. And there's a lot to be said for that. Not all instructionals are the same. But there are some examples that are very good and can, in used in the right context, can allow you to make significant improvements in your development. Again, the problem probably is that it's just massively oversaturated. There is just an instructional for everything. And using that information, we've not been very helpful here, have we? We've sort of talked about instructionals, but not given much summary. We should probably give some summary. So I'll go point 1 is obviously be careful of the information that you're selecting. That is a big one. Before you spend 300 quid, unless you've got access to one of these dodgy G Drive folders with them all in for free, which is, if you have, respect.
That definitely don't exist.
They definitely don't exist, but everyone seems to have access to. Yeah, definitely don't know about them. But pick your information wisely. Don't just. It's almost like saying like someone can read 50 books and not get anything from them, but one person can read one book that changes their life. And that's sort of what we're trying to get. And obviously that's very difficult to do because we're just talking about grappling. But try and narrow that information down based on who's teaching it. Are they successful? Do they share similar traits to yourself, i.e. they built the same? Do they move in similar ways? Do they have games that are relatively similar to yours? That can be a really good way of narrowing that information. Approach them from a problem mindset rather than just I'm going to do this and hope for the best mindset, because it probably won't hold any context. Like, go into it looking with a problem that you've got. hitting a knee shield, I can't pin someone in the back, I can't control the back, whatever it is, and look at it from that perspective. Again, search for the generality, not the specificity. So what are the key themes throughout the instructional? Are they focused on, like you said, like good information, like win the inside position, keep someone's shoulders flat, hip height, things like that are going to give you some real bang for buck that you can apply in a variety of different contexts, not just grip the wrist with a thumb up, thumb down fucking bullshit thing that never exists in the real world. Again, are they just marketing a system, or are they actually applying something that has context? Like, you probably don't need to buy an instructional on a buggy choke. You probably need to spend a bit more time working out how to pass a guard. I don't know, whatever it is, defending your leg locks, whatever it is. But so things like that, they're going to be really impactful. I've run out of ideas. What other ideas do you have, Dave?
So don't invest time in things that, well, in positions that rely on your opponents doing something fucking stupid. So, for example,
good
if
idea.
you're going, I need to learn the buggy choke, and you are a white belt, you fucking don't. You just need to practice playing guard and accept that you're going to eat shit for a long time. Because the reason you're getting to a position where you start to think that a buggy choke is useful is because you suck at retaining guard. And that's
You just keep getting passed.
Yeah, exactly. So learn that. Like, yeah, essentially, one of the other things that you could do is just ask your coach or your training partners, like, what are the things you think I do really badly, or where do you find it easiest to deal with me from? And that can give you an insight into where you probably need to spend some time. You might not like the answers; they might make you sad.
Yeah, I'd say like a really good thing is like when you're going to apply it into a practical setting, because that's a really important thing. We have to go and apply it in a practical setting. The two key things that I would then bring up from the start of the episode is, what is your intention for the session? So what are you trying to get better at? And what specifically are you looking for? So what's your attention and what's your intention? What are the two key things that you can define within the session that you're heading into, that you're going to take and apply and reflect on? Because that's really important. We have to reflect as well. So when you're watching your instructional and you've narrowed down your search terms, you've got the instructional, you've figured out what's going to be best for you, the person that's going to be best for you, how they explain it, etc. You then can take the information, go into your sparring session on a Thursday night that I've quoted every night, but whatever day it is, the day doesn't matter, funnily enough. But then define your intentions and your attentions for the session. So what is your intention going in? What you're trying to work on? And what certain things do you have to then apply within the session? Is it just like, within this session, I'm going to try and keep my opponent's shoulders flat to the ground? Within this session, I'm going to try and keep my opponent's legs separated. Within this session, I'm going to try and keep my opponent's hands separated. I'm not going to let them connect their hands. Whatever it is. And just play with that and reflect on it and see what happens. I think that's really important. And use that information to then guide you. The instruction doesn't have to be gospel. Remember, it is just a source of information. You then have to then go and work on it yourself and practice it, be good at it, be shit at it for much longer than you'll probably be good at it, but eventually you'll probably get good at it. And obviously continue to play the game of grappling. That's the really important thing, is just because you're focusing on one thing, the rest of the game still exists, and keep working on the rest of the game as well.
So I think, sorry, just to tie into what we said with pick something that's problem-based. Pick something there, if you do it and get it right, it's going to really mean something to you. So whether that's get the advice from that one training partner where it really fucks you off when they get something, or from that position where it really pisses you off when you get stuck there. Because then if you have to eat shit, the times where you don't are going to stand out by such stark contrast that you're going to go, holy shit, this is awesome, I need to chase this. Like, it needs to be a thing where there is an immediate and big sort of egotistical and meaningful hit of endorphins of like, I did it, even if all that is because you know
Go
that
lie down.
training partner will go, oh,
Go
for
and lie down.
fuck's sake. Like it can be that petty where, so I just want to bring more pettiness back in, but some of the best improvements I have made are solely where I know that if I do that to a certain training partner, they're going to go, oh, fuck off, because
Yeah.
that's all the reaction that I want, and it brings me deep joy to do that to people. So know where you're going to get a large amount of value from by doing the thing that you've done against the person that you've
Yeah.
done it to.
I agree. Probably a good place to leave it there, Dave. Again, as always, we are contactable on social media. Dave, what's your social media?
At Get Strong Roll More on Instagram.
And I'm
And then
at Brotherhood Performance.
Yeah, and then Get Strong Roll More on YouTube.
And I'm Brotherhood Performance on YouTube as well. Yeah, I forgot about YouTube. It's a good shout, that, Dave. Obviously, the North South podcast, please like, share, comment, all that bullshit that we're supposed to do as podcast hosts.
Tell us your favourite
As
instructional.
always, tell us your favourite instructional. As always, we are more than open to feedback. If you think we're good, you think we're shit, you think we talk about something too much, too little, any podcast ideas for the future you want to hear about, please let us know. We should probably do a Q&A episode again soon, shouldn't we? We've not done one for for a while. That'd probably be a good little episode to talk about.
The mystery boxes.
Yeah, if you want to know what's in the mystery boxes. If you want to see more of the dog that's currently pissing me off at the minute throughout this entire episode, it's been doing my head in. But anyway, yeah, right. Nice one, Dave.
All right.
I'll speak to you soon. Take it easy.
You too, buddy. Bye.
Peace.